actually going to get the most out of a workstation that packs a 24-core i9, 32 GB of DDR5 RAM and a full terabyte of SSD storage? If you're the kind of creator who jumps between massive 3D renders, multi-track video edits and data crunching scripts every day, this might feel like a dream. If you're just looking for a solid laptop for email, web browsing and a few office docs, you'll probably be paying for power you'll never use. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. When you first see a box like this, the headline numbers are dazzling, but the real question is whether the hardware translates into a smoother workflow for the tasks you actually do. I spent a couple of weeks testing the HP Z2G9 on a mix of projects that most freelancers and small studio teams tackle: a 4K video timeline with 3 effects layers, a CAD assembly that hits 300K polygons, and a Python-based machine learning model that loads a gigabyte-sized dataset. The goal was to see if the machine stays responsive when you're juggling those apps side by side, and whether any hidden bottlenecks show up once the spec sheet is out of the way. First off, the processor lives up to its reputation for raw compute. In the video editing test, the 13th Gen i9 handled the timeline without the dreaded frame dropping that usually forces a proxy workflow on less powerful rigs. The render queue moved about 15% faster than a comparable desktop I've been using for years, which is the kind of time saving that actually shows up on an invoice. That's a practical strength. You can keep the full resolution clips in the project and let the workstation do the heavy lifting without a noticeable lag. The 32 GB of DDR5 RAM is another area where the Z2G9 proves useful. I opened Photoshop, Illustrator, After Effects, and my IDE all at once, and memory pressure never crossed the red line in the task manager. For a data science workflow that loads a 1.2 GB CSV into a Pandas data frame, the extra headroom meant I could spin up a second notebook kernel without the system swapping to the SSD. In real terms, that translates to fewer please wait moments and a smoother multitasking experience. Storage is where the machine feels generous. The 1 TB NVMe SSD gave me a near-instant boot, and copying a 50 GB project folder across the internal drive took under 20 seconds. That speed makes a noticeable difference when you're constantly pulling raw footage from external drives into a working directory. It also means you can keep a decent library of assets on the same drive without constantly worrying about space, which is a practical win for small teams that don't have a dedicated NAS. Built-in security and remote management are features that often sit on the back of the spec sheet, but they become useful when you're managing a workstation that lives in a shared office or a home office with multiple users. With HP's firmware-level TPM and the ability to push policies through a cloud console, I could lock down the box for a client who needed to keep proprietary designs safe. The trade-off is a slightly longer boot time while the security checks run, but for most professionals that's a small price to pay for peace of mind. The Gigabit Ethernet port is a hidden strength that I appreciated during the CAD file transfer test. I moved a 3.5 GB assembly from a networked storage server to the workstation, and the transfer completed in just over a minute. When you're dealing with large engineering files, that wired connection beats Wi-Fi every time, especially in office environments where the wireless spectrum can be crowded. Now, let's talk about where the Z2G9 might miss the mark for certain buyers. The power supply is a 450W unit, which is adequate for the stock configuration but leaves little headroom if you decide to add a high-end GPU later. If your workflow leans heavily into GPU-accelerated rendering or you plan to upgrade to a professional graphics card, you'll likely need to replace the PSU yourself, a task that isn't covered by the default warranty and adds cost and effort. For users who are certain they'll stay CPU-centric, it's fine, but for anyone eyeing a future graphics upgrade, it's a hidden trade-off. Another practical weakness is the price point. Workstations in this class typically sit in the $3,000 to $4,000 range, and the Z2G9 is no exception. For a freelancer who only needs to run occasional 4K edits, a mid-range desktop with a decent GPU could achieve similar results at a lower cost. The value really comes from the combination of the 24-core CPU, DDR5 memory, and the enterprise-grade security suite. If you're not going to leverage those specific advantages, you might be overpaying. Thermal behavior is worth mentioning, too. Under sustained load like a full 3-minute render, the chassis stayed warm but never hit thermal throttling. The fans ramped up audibly, which is something you'll notice if you're in a quiet studio. The noise level isn't a deal breaker, but it's something to keep in mind if you need a whisper-quiet environment. So, who should buy?